Hey, and welcome back to another Revit video. And in this video, we're going to look at some advanced family modeling that might require masses. Generally speaking, this would be required if you're trying to do anything with a double curve. In this case, I've got a client who wants a light fixture modeled, and this particular light fixture does have a shade with a double curve. And I'm going to try my best to keep it as simple as possible because I don't want to overcomplicate this for myself or for you. So before we get into it, if at any point in this video you happen to learn something, please demolish that like button. It really helps me out quite a lot. Also, do consider subscribing and check the link in the description below to my free school community if you want to join that up. Be welcome. It'd be great to have you there. Okay, getting into it now. We are in just a very basic Revit template, nothing special here, but we first need to actually look at what we're going to model. And what do we want to model? It's going to be this light fixture here. And this light fixture here, there's two variations of it. But first thing is you can see that the shade, while it looks pretty simple, there's quite a few things going on here. First of all, it's angled, and we can deal with that later. I'm not so worried about that, but it does have a curved nature to it, but also within basically two different work planes at least. And with that, we were basically dealing with two curves in two directions at the same time, so double curves. But these are the overall dimensions we want to use. And there's a different version also, which is basically just a smaller version. Smaller versus large. So this one large stands straight up and this other one angled. So I won't worry too much about the difference between the UL and the CE because we'll model mainly the CE version, which is just the more basic fixture. But basically this is going to be a wall-based sconce with a shade. And so this shade is what is going to require a bit more effort on our part to achieve the double curve that we need. And we're going to do that from File, New Family, you might think, and we'll get there eventually, but we're going to start with the conceptual mass because we do need to start with the mass. So there's my mass template. I will open this up, and essentially what we're working with is a blank slate, which is great. It looks very similar to basically building a family, but it's a mass. So I have my own issues with mass in Revit, but it is required nonetheless to do something like this. So I first of all want to establish kind of the overall extents of what we're looking at and make sure that we have a scale to go off of based on the image that we're trying to work with. In this case, the image will be that wall sconce. And so I've got a medium and small. We can deal with the other one later, but I'm going to bring this in just because I have something close to an elevation view. I want to bring this in for scale, and that will work just fine. Okay, so with this, obviously I want this shade to be centered essentially on my point there, but the nice thing is we have these dimensions here that we can start to use and determine where we want to actually place points. So the difference between massing and just traditional families is that it's a 3D environment that we can actually include points and use those points to create masses that we'll create in this video. Okay, so first of all, let's go ahead and we'll dump a point here on the origin. And the nice thing is I can just simply put a point up here and put a point down here. And so I'm trying to make sure that I have this dimension 14.6 inches as the overall. So I can highlight that, and it's completely blown out, so the scale's really far off, but I can essentially do equals and 14.6 and make sure you put inches divided by 2. It's basically like an Excel formula, but I can put the equals here and make sure you have the equals or else this will error out. So let's go ahead and do this, and we can see that my point goes way down there. I'm actually going to copy this dimension and put that as the same here. So we can zoom in and see that, yep, that's what we want. It's just my scale is way off. I'll change this to 1.5 inches is fine, but I need to scale this down. So first thing I'm going to do is move the bottom of this, at least to the best of my ability there, to this bottom point that I just drew. So there, and now I can scale this image. I can hit RE, or I can come up here to hit scale, and I want to make sure I have a graphical selected, and I can go to the bottom point all the way up to the top point of this light fixture, and then come down all the way to that point that I just drew, that top point that I just drew right there, see? Okay, so now I have this drawn, which is fantastic. Something else I want to do next is then actually draw an ellipsis, because this is an ellipsis, and I need to establish the extents, which we're kind of doing with points, but I need to establish the extents of this model in lines as well as points. So I'll draw this here. I'll start with my first point there, go up to my point there, and so I'll have that at the bottom. But then the next thing is to determine what this width should be, and this might look like I want to match it with the image, but I technically don't, so maybe I'm a step ahead of myself. But really what I want to do at this point is just know that I have a width of 11.9 inches. So again, I want to do the same thing with these points. I'll drag these out here. It doesn't matter where they are now. I want to make sure that I pin this image so I'm not dragging this around when I'm selecting these points. All right, there's my point, and I want to make sure this is 11.9 inches divided by 2. Cool, I'm going to copy this dimension, copy this one as well, right? There we go. Okay, and so with this, now I can draw my ellipses. I'm going to go ahead and unpin this because it doesn't quite matter. Draw my ellipses there, and so now I have all of my points that I can use to draw the ellipses. Now I feel really good about this. I have my dimensions, and if we go to this in 3D, we can start to see what we're looking at, and that looks quite good. I like this, and it looks like what I was hoping to achieve so far. So then, with that said, we actually need to go to, from a north elevation, let's go to our west elevation. And again, I'm going to bring in the same image. Actually, we may get lucky in that we can copy this in. I will paste this in right here. Cool. And it looks like it should be, is the main question here, it should be the same scale. And actually we can determine that if we look at the scale here. We can see that there's my horizontal and vertical scale. And let's just go back to our north, select this image, and yeah, it looks to be the exact same, which is fantastic. So now I can go back to my west, and I just want to place this side here. So that's basically the bottom there, and I want to put that on my bottom point. And so what this is going to do is tell me how far this line should go out, where should the point be, this extent there. Okay, so with that said, I do know that 4.9 inches is the overall, and for the sake of this and being close, I'm going to call that this dimension here would be about half of that. All right, I think that's going to serve us well. So let's go ahead and do this, and again, same type of deal here. I will do equals 4.9 inches divided by 2. And so that's not exactly right, but at least visually or graphically, it is. And so I feel good about this in a sense that I have that dimension, and I've decided it's going to be half of this dimension, and that's fine. So now, instead of drawing an ellipsis, I'm going to actually just draw this start-end radius. So I'll choose that point, and then I will choose my point right there. Okay, great. So I no longer need this image here. It was just basically for reference. It turns out that I never needed this one because it was a little bit off graphically, but that's okay. So coming into 3D, I can see what we have here, and we're getting there. The nice thing is that what I can do is I can select this point, and there's a tool up here, or a way to draw is a spline through points. And the fact that I have already selected 3 points means I can come up here, choose that, and now I have this line, which is actually a spline going through those points. And that's exactly what I want, which is great. Now, because of what this ultimately looks like, it's kind of segmented. And if you're looking at it here, it's basically like I've got these flat surfaces that I guess move up this curve. So basically what I want to do is I want to go to my level 1 plan. And again, we're getting real close because these dimensions are not pointed out in the documentation for this light fixture itself. So basically what I want to do is I want to be able to cut this into equal portions. Basically, what is this half point, so I can segment this across, because we may not ultimately want this line to use. We want to have a segmented portion. So what I can do here is actually divide the path, and I want 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. In this case, I probably do actually want 5 or 6. I think 5 is actually the answer, because one of the points will be here as the midpoint, and then one will each be on the end, and then I've got my 2 points there in the middle. So all I did was I used the divide path tool, and I picked the number of points. And the idea now is that they are equally spaced, which is perfect. And so that means that this point here is something that I can use to physically draw or add a point. So cool. And again, like I said, I would only need this to establish the points that I drew in. But other than that, I don't actually need the line that's there. So I can go ahead and I can just not worry about it for one, but we can actually come up here to draw a segment. So I want to actually draw these new points that I have here. And I can do that anywhere. But I can tab to this new point there, which is great. And then tab to the midpoint. Same with this point, tab right there, and then there. So okay, great. So now we have this line, which we actually want to use to help break this up a bit more. And you'll start to see how this really plays in together soon. And now I can delete this line because I don't need it, but I've got these really nice points here. I do want to make sure I do have points here. Not the end of the world because we do have the line there, but just as a reference. Okay, so this is looking really good. We're well on our way, at least. We have kind of the overall extents and everything established, but there's a couple more things that we need to do. We need to actually establish the other lines and segments here before we start making a form. So with this, I simply need to slice this in half. I then need to take this overall ellipsis, add some points to this that we can reference to give us some extra profiles to use as we're creating the rest of this double curve. Okay, so I'm going to select this here. And again, I'm going to go to divide path here at the top, and I'm going to choose this. Come over here, and we can see obviously we have a bunch of points here, but I want to be very particular with where the points are and how many, everything like that. What I want really is to find a couple points that would be serving here at the top and the bottom. So like these in particular I'm looking for because I'm looking to create these 4 panels. And so these panels are, they have the double curves each. So basically what we're going to have is one mass that's going to have these different panels that create the one shade. Okay, so with this, obviously I have these points here, which is great. That's what I need, but I need to get some of these points down here. So we can play with this a bit. The main thing here is maybe I do want to start with a number or a distance. Let's go with the distance and put that centered. And it might be that I want these an inch apart. And this is probably on our way, looking pretty close. It might be that 0.75. I just want to find a point that's essentially close enough. Again, I don't have a dimension for what this should be, but I want to make sure that I'm pretty close. And I think I like 1 inch a bit more. And so I want to use this point here. And basically this point will go through this point there and then down. So again, we need to add true points. So I'll add a point there, do the same thing at the bottom, there and there. And the reason that we know this is kind of uniform and symmetrical is that we specifically have the justification as centered, and that's perfect. So I know that I'm basically centered and mirrored on both sides. So with this, again, I want to use that spline through point. So I can choose this point, I can choose this point, and then that point. And then I can spline through my points, and look at that. All right, so we're getting close. As much of a pain as it's been so far, we're getting there. So again, do the same thing on this side, and would you look at that? I'm impressed with this. Now, this is great. We have all of our lines and everything established, but what we don't have is actually the form itself, like the mass. Before we do that, I do want to save this. And with this saved, I basically need to find a way to receive the different lines here on the end with knowing that I'm going to select all of those together to receive this one profile, 2, 3, 4 different masses there, essentially that make up the one. So we need to establish kind of the outer edge all the way around so that we can choose each one of these panels individually. Okay. So then, I know I mentioned we wouldn't have to necessarily draw in these points, but it's probably best that you do. The reason is I've had some difficulties in slicing this ellipsis in half, and it may be that at this point we definitely don't want to do that because of where we've established all these divided points. I can't get that sliced exactly where I think it should be as far as like straight down the middle. So one way around that is I can choose these points, I can add all these points, and once I do that, we will then again be able to use all these points to draw a spline through them and receive basically 1/2 of this ellipsis. And you'll see why we do this here in just a second. So with all these, I can choose these in particular, not these up top, but all of these on the side, because of what I want to do is spline through these. And you can see that we have this new line, and specifically that we have this entire panel that, because it's all joined in the lines, is now selected, which is great. That's exactly what we want. And so I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So we have the other one to work with, and then we can deal with everything in the middle in just a second also, because the same concept will apply to the panels in the middle, but it will be slightly different in that we don't have to go through this full process. It's just finding those edge lines, those lines on the edge. Okay, so with this, I will select again all of these different points, and we will spline through them so that we can get this panel just like the other side. Cool. And just to show you that this does work, I can select this panel, create form at the top, and there we go. It works. That is really nice to see that it's actually working. And again, I can do the same thing over here, create form. Wonderful. Like that looks really good, and it's coming through this flat segment, which is great. And then up here, so basically we need to establish, like we did this line here, this edge line for that, we need to actually establish this line there. So what I can do is I can select the point there, which I thought I had, the point there. So these 3 points, point, and this may not ultimately be the way I want to do it, but I want to go to a north elevation so I can look at this. Actually, I want to get rid of this image. Let's select this line, this one, and again, use our spline through points. And it looks great. We have our line right there that I can tab to. There's quite a few lines here, but nonetheless, it is there. And I can do the same thing at the bottom, make sure we have all of our points. Point, cool. And then I can select these points, spline through, cool. So now what I can do is come back to my 3D view, and I can start to select this actual panel here. So something I realized is that before we end up making these 2 panels, something that we really need to do to be able to access these lines within the other profiles is to make them reference lines. And so I can select all 3 of these. And in fact, let's go ahead and select this one as well. So these 3 here. With these 3 selected, we come over here to is reference line. Let's go ahead and check that. And so basically we have these as reference lines, and they're going to turn like a purple pink, which will just allow us to use these other panels, which that will allow us to use these lines to create these other panels and not just the outer panel. So I can come up here and again add points if we don't have them yet. Well, we got the points, so I can choose these 3 points and then spline through points. I have my line there, and then I can add one more down here and I can create form. There we go. I can select this one and then that one, create my form, and then now here's the fun part. I can select this now. I before could not specifically, and that one and this specific edge up here, and I can create form. Now this looks completely stupid because we just want this face, but I can simply delete that, and what I'm left with is this really nice looking face right there, and that looks quite good. That's exactly what I wanted. And now I can do the same thing on the other side. Again, pick this line, not the whole profile there, but just that line, again, just this top edge right there, tabbing to select all of these, and then that one there, create our form. Yep, we have this kind of absurdity here, but I can just delete this face, and then we're left with this really nice flat form right there. Look at this. So I'm really impressed with this. And this is it. We're good. Now this is just dealing with one size, and so I'll probably end up just making the other one on my own, but this is really good. And I'll go ahead and save this, and we can load this into our basic Revit project. That's great, because obviously we needed to start with the shade. I'll show you what it looks like in the project setting, then we can start to add the rest of it. So let's go ahead and load this in. Cool. So that looks good right there. And if I go to a 3D view, of course don't want all of those, we can see it right there. So this is great. That's exactly what I wanted. It looks really good. Okay, so now what I need to do is I can go up to architecture and then wall, and I can just choose any basic wall, but then the tool we want to use specifically is pick faces. And so basically what we have when it comes to masses is all we have are faces, and we can't use a mass in any way other than really to do this, because a mass, while it is a Revit element, it's a Revit element that doesn't have any characteristics. It's not a true wall. It's not a window. It's not a shade for a light fixture in this case. But I can start to pick these faces, which is really helpful. So if we look at this now, if I were to actually place some of these walls on here, if I go to pick faces and I choose this face, I'm getting this error, can't make face wall shape. Now, why would that be? Well, generally, in my opinion, at least, I believe it's because of the thickness of the wall. So I'm looking at like an 8-inch thick wall. And so imagine putting an 8-inch thick wall on this curved surface. You're asking about all these issues that you're going to have with overlapping surfaces. And so that's the problem here. So let's go ahead and I'll duplicate this, and all I've done is made an 1/8 inch. Like this is probably technically the thickness of the shade. I've taken that just basic wall, it's 1/8 of an inch, duplicated that 8-inch wall and made it in simply an 1/8 of an inch wall. So with this said, now I've got the 1/8 inch. I'm going to pick my face, and I'll choose my face, and look, it draws it right on there, which is amazing. And if I come over here, I can draw this face. Now, one issue I see clearly is that I can't, first of all, draw on this face, but I'm getting these weird triangles here. And I think one way around this might be to simplify this a bit. So I can go back here to Edit Family, and let's go ahead and go to 3D View, and deleting these 2 panels in the middle is perfectly fine because we're gonna have to redo these a bit. But you know, we did draw these, let's call this more accurate and more fancy angles here at the top, but I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of those, just so what we're working with is a bit straightened out. It's not going to be exactly perfect, but you'll never notice. And there's just one limitation around adding like a curved profile against another curved profile. You're going to get these extra faces. And so one way around that is to simply do this. So if we go to our north elevation, I'm basically going to ignore this point and just draw a line from this top point to this one. Now, obviously, the advantage here is that, again, it's going to be straight, and so we'll get this nice, smooth surface as opposed to having an extra point here in the middle. Now, the one thing that's wrong is that this area will not show up, and you'll see that in just a second. This is a sacrifice I'm willing to make because you'll basically never see it, first of all, but then it just so happens that this will actually make it work correctly. There may be a better way around this if you wanted to get the exact shape, but this I know will work. And so if we choose this, we can go back to 3D, see this a little better. Choose this point, or choose that line, I'm sorry, that one, and then our straight one, this one down the middle, and then again this one right there. I can choose Create Form. Again, we're gonna get this weird kind of bump out, but we can get rid of this face, and now we can see, yeah, I don't have any sort of like extra face in here. I just have the single face that I need and expect to see. And that's just by coming straight across here. That's just the limitation of the type of thing that we're working with. Selecting those 4 lines, I get that, and cool. All right, so this looks a heck of a lot better. I don't have these extra faces. And so let's go ahead and load this back in. Yeah, I'll save this. Always recommend doing that. So I can load this in, and these extra faces now are gone, which is fantastic. Now, if I had gone in and already drawn in those walls, I could simply update those walls basically to the new mass, the new version of the mass. But because I haven't done that, we don't see anything, and nor that option. So we'll again go to 1/8 inch wall, select pick face, and I'll come over here and you can see that I can select all of these faces, which is great. That one, this one, this one, and this one. So that's perfect, perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to see. So if we come in here, I haven't determined what this is. I know it has everything to do with like the direction that these masses are facing by default. And unlike other 3D programs, there's not a way to like flip normals or flip the way you're seeing this mass. But typically with a wall, the fact that this is a wall, I could hit spacebar and I'd be able to flip it from one side to the other. Now, because it's basically matching the shape of this mass, which is not flat, and just the fact that it's matching this mass, I don't have the option of pressing the spacebar, getting this to flip. Now, it took me, when I first learned this, a while to figure out what this is, but I'm actually going to delete these and start over. Not that that's a huge deal. We go to wall, and for the sake of this, I probably want the walls to end up behind it, so whenever they do appear in the front, the faces match up like I would expect. So I can come in here and select this face. So I don't necessarily want this facing out like I just mentioned. I want that effect, and that effect. So how would I change that? Well, I can actually flip this. It's not even really flipping, it's just how the wall is applied. It's just so bizarre. But based on our different options here for the location line, so this just happens to be finish face exterior. I want to change this to the exterior, so finish face exterior. So I come over here, then I start to apply that to whatever the exterior is. So technically that side, which honestly, that's it. I mean, it looks good. Now the nice thing is here, I come up to my massing in sight and show mass, and ta-da. That is great. Now, again, we have those straight lines across, but that is not the end of the world. But what we have now is these walls that match beautifully. So the update face I was looking at here is if I were to come into the mass and change the look, change the dimensions, change something like that, I could update these walls, like the actual Revit walls, to that massing, assuming it would still allow me to do that. I could at least update it and try to do that, but I don't need to do that. I basically have the right dimensions. So this is great. This is how it would work once we get the light fixture actually into Revit. The next step I need to take really is, because we just have the shade done, is I'll go ahead and I'll make the other shade after all of this, after this video. But with the one shade, with the actual shade done, we need to take this mass into a separate family that we're going to use to make the true light fixture, because that's important, right? No matter what we're going to have to do is apply walls or roofs or whatever it might be to the mass as the shade in the Revit project. So what's going to carry over into that family is the mass. So that's great. So I'm going to show my mass again. Come right here, there's my mass, which is wonderful. I'll edit my family. And so what we have now again is the mass that we're perfectly happy with. It's got the right dimensions and everything. And if I wanted a different size, that's not hard to make because this wasn't too bad. So what I want to do now is go up to File. I could choose another mass if I wanted to, which is probably what we're going to have to do, because when it comes to loading in a mass that is, it's a mass. I use the mass template, the conceptual mass template. We're going to have to basically use another mass, and that's fine because we can basically create the rest of the light fixture as a mass, but with true properties that you would have with any sort of Revit model. Okay, so with this now, I don't want to bother loading this in yet because I can always do that later. So what I want to do is actually spend the time to create this actual light fixture, like everything that we would see behind the shade. And this is definitely more simple, and I don't need to make this too crazy, but there's some other things that we can cover as far as like kind of advanced massing that would be good to cover. So let's go ahead and look at that now. So there's a lot of ways to handle this. And I think what I might do again is go to my west elevation here. So I'm on the side, and I want to just start drawing essentially the profile of this light fixture. And I want this to look 3D and look correct. I wouldn't have to be in a mass to do this, but because the shade is a mass and I want this all a part of one family, this will need to be a mass as well. So I like it or not, that's kind of what it is, unfortunately. So with that said, I can start to draw some lines and some points to get that. And so if we're looking at this image one more time, and this is obviously the one we were using, we can see that the 4.9 inches, we might divide that by 2 to give us kind of the overall profile. Basically, I want to draw a line that's down the center of all of this that I might want to use to draw different points and have different profiles and whatever it might be. So this is a great example of how we might add multiple profiles to a sweep. Whereas if we're in like Revit native modeling and we're using a sweep or a swept blend, sweep is limited to one profile. A swept blend is limited to 2 profiles. And with masses, again, like it or not, we're not limited by the number of profiles. There's just a completely different workflow that I'd rather not have to do, but given something like this, we have to do it, and that's perfectly fine. So again, with points or lines, whatever, kind of all that, we want to start establishing what these dimensions are. And so first of all, like to draw a point here at the origin, and then knowing that this is a total of 4.9 inches, what we did was we divided that by 2, which means that the shade was half of that. And so my thought again is that I would have this dimension be half of that as well. So equals 4.9 inches divided by 2. And again, obviously it's very small, and we change our scale to 1.5 inches or something like that. So there we go. So this is basically, this would be the center of that light fixture itself, the light source, the center right there. So that's my dimension. I'm pretty happy with that. And so we want to start drawing some revolves. So how would I do that? Well, I can go to, again, my 3D view, zoom in here, and I can see that looking at these points, I simply need to start to draw a revolve. So how do we do that? Well, I can come in to draw a reference line, which is great. Reference line or model line will work, but let's go ahead and draw a reference line here. It doesn't matter where it ends up being, but point to point is perfectly fine. And if I just draw a line out here, it could be anything, and then simply selecting this these lines and that one, create a form, and there's my revolve. Now, obviously this is not right, but it's a good starting point. And that's at a principle how we would do it. So I can take this line and, because we probably want to have this drawn first, I can start out here, moving this line there and moving this line out. I can just set that dimension in just a second. It looks like I might just need one line over here, and getting this dimension right. If I want to have this point, maybe this is about 1 inch, and this angle, again, getting somewhat precise here, as precise as you want to be at least. That angle could be at a 45, and then moving this up to the origin and this back there. Okay, so that's great. Let's go ahead and make our revolve. So there's our revolve. Do I like it? Does it match? Does it look exactly right? Not quite. So clearly I need to bring this line out a bit more, which is fine. Just simply drawing different dimensions out here. This is how you would edit that. So maybe this is a 1/4 inch out. That looks decent now. So I can create that line right there. So that looks pretty good. And I don't even technically need this second line to draw the revolve. I can draw this here and draw my revolve right there. Now, because I want it closed, probably best that we go ahead and add these lines here. And so I draw it from the back to that and right here. So that's great. Turns out we don't need this one in the back, but I can choose these two and that, create my form, and there we go. That looks really good. I can close this up by choosing those two and creating form, just like that. Again, I don't necessarily need this face out here, but deleting that means that I have a wonderful solid. That's great. I'm happy with that. So this is basically just that back portion of the light fixture itself, and then we're going to draw this cable coming out to the actual light source or the bulb. So here we go. Continuing this on, we can go back to our west view. And again, if I have this as my center point, I basically just need to draw a curve that I'm happy with and using some of these dimensions that are close. So again, this is not going to be the most beautifully accurate, perfect. I can try and get this profile more accurate if I wanted to, but because it will be behind a wall, this is going to be quite close in my opinion. Okay, so let's go ahead and draw a line. So I have a line there, and then I just need to determine how high this might be. I probably want to use something like that as my line. So let's go ahead and draw my point here, get rid of this. So there's a lot of ways that you can use points or lines to help you determine what you might want to draw. And so in this case, I simply want to come out a bit more. And it actually looks like I need to edit this a bit more because I don't actually like the way this looks. So one way I would edit that is if I were to bring this in, I could just simply drag all of this in, which is really great. I could do this on the fly. I could even go to my west view and determine, what this might look like just to make sure that proportions are pretty much there, which is great. And so I like that a lot. And with that, let's go ahead and draw what this looks like. So I do start with a line coming straight out. And, does it make sense if that's a complete inch? Yeah, it probably does. And then knowing that I'm going to come down here, and I actually might want to start with this instead, which is just a simple arc from here all the way to here, probably at a 45. So that looks good. And then I actually might just trim these together. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Okay, so if I go into my 3D view, I can see that this is what we're working with. So I essentially need a profile on each one of these ends. In this case, I don't really need one on each end, just because this is going to be the same profile, which exists right there. And then we'll draw the rest of the fixture from there above it. Okay, so with that, I can simply go to my circle here, and I actually want to go to my level 1 view, zoom in here, and I can draw my circle. 1/4 inch, let's actually make this an 1/8 of an inch radius. And so going to 3D, I always like to see where it is in 3D. Obviously, it's not in the right place. But what I can simply do is move that. Looks like I need to go to my west elevation. Perfectly fine. Up to this point. Moving this from this point to that point. So looking at this again in 3D, I can see, ooh, that looks about right. We need to actually select these sets of lines here and make sure those are set as a reference line again. And you can see what happens here is that I basically am working with this profile. And if I come in here, I do have that option if I come to that point. And with this, I can select this, and that is now serving as a reference line, choosing that profile that we just drew, creating our form, and look at that. Okay, I like this. This is looking pretty good. Do the proportions match technically what I'm looking for? I think they're quite close, and I would call it close enough. I do like it. And so then we finally need to, again, come up from here, and maybe we want to establish what this dimension might be. This looks to be maybe from there to there, looks to be about 1/3, maybe almost 1/2 of this overall dimension. It actually looks like from this point up is that dimension. So if I want to see what this is, we can determine that there. So 1 inch and 1/8. So maybe we want to draw a line that is about 3 inches. Does that look right? It doesn't look exactly right. So maybe 3.5 inches will be great. Okay, so this is going to be basically my overall height. So the top of the light fixture, the light source, all of that will be up here, and I need to determine what these other dimensions might be. So I've got my line there, and I can split this wherever I want to. So maybe looks like about 1/2 inch. If we want to say, what this dimension is, 1/2 inch, and then 3/4 of an inch, and then our light source. So basically we have 3 different things going on here that we'll each use as separate profiles of, drawing revolves or whatever it might be. So with this, let's go ahead and select this first one, make that a reference. And then from there, we can draw what this actual profile looks like. And we want to focus really in on this profile here. And it's, a series of steps down and that. So this is going to come out a little more, go up. Again, my overall is going to be here, so let's kind of use that as a reference. But then I want to make sure that I have lines that come out to here, here, here. Okay, and I'm pretty happy with this. And so it's not that it's arbitrary, but it's kind of is. If you have these dimensions, that's great. Use that because it can clearly be helpful to you. But I don't necessarily have these and what they are. But nonetheless, it will get us pretty close. So I don't need this line, so let's delete that one. And all I need to do is select this and actually tab to this specific reference plane and then create my form. Okay, look at that. That's great. So then all we have left is the weirdness of everything below the light bulb, all the screws and whatnot. So I will quickly draw that in, and that's going to fill in this gap here, and then finally we'll have the light source there. So I'll be right back whenever I have that profile drawn. Okay, and this looks pretty good, as silly as it is. I don't need this top line again, so I can get rid of that. So really all I need is this. And with this, I can start to select some of these, and selecting those along with my reference plane, we can draw them in. This is probably the best way that I found to get this to work the way that I expect it to, and create our form there. Just a few of these. Boom, okay. And then all the way up here, there we go. And then I'm actually going to leave this little portion out and drag this down. So now this looks really good. Probably better than I was expecting, but it looks good. So now what we have left is this portion up here. That is for our actual light fixture. And so this should be fairly simple. And that we just can draw a couple of arcs and revolve that around. Let's go ahead and try that out. So coming over here, it's about there, and then maybe we can choose the top point. That's probably a good idea. I'm not liking that so much, but okay, so maybe I work with something like this. But that's not too far off. That's pretty good. And I can just tell if I revolve this around, I won't quite like what this looks like. So for the sake of this, I'm actually going to mirror this, and I won't ultimately leave it there, but this is the result we'll get. But I want to kind of fillet this so I get a bit of a smoother looking profile. So I can simply come over here, and there's a bunch of ways to do this. Let's call it the less accurate way of doing this. But I come in here to this, and I just want to match what this might look like and just smooth it out. And then I can trim these together. And so I don't really care about the other side so much. So I can then choose this and our top reference line there, create our form, and look at that. We have our wonderful-ish light bulb. So clearly some proportions are off here. So I think what I might do is just make the bulb a bit taller, just so it actually looks right. And it's very simple to do this. Even with this line, I can actually take this, and maybe I want it to be that, and I can really just change my scale a bit. And so, yeah, maybe I want it to be more like that, maybe a little taller. That's going to be about 2 inches, which that makes proportional sense when we're talking about a light bulb here. So let's choose this one and then maybe the top one. And again, we can make our fillet-ish one more time. Tab to this one we no longer want. That one, we can, again, mirror this across and then deal with this top portion here. So we're going to be pretty close to 2 inches, which is more what I would have expected for a light bulb like this. So cool. Coming down here, select that. And again, I can trim all of this together. That looks really good. And again, I only want this to be one side. So I'm going to draw a line right here that I can use to trim that in half. I don't need this portion there, nor that. And so now I can choose this and our line, create our form, and we are off to the races. That looks really nice. Proportional, more or less. Yeah, it's close. And so close is going to do it for us here. If I look at this in 3D, we can see that, yep, I'm pretty happy here. I do need to close this up. So choosing those lines, I can create a form that looks really nice. And so, yeah, I'm very happy with this. So the final thing to do here, obviously, is to save this. And then I'm going to load in my shade and we can deal with materials. Okay, so let's then go to our shade, which is here. And again, it's a mask. We don't need to worry about it being a mask in the family. That's not a big deal. But I'm going to go ahead and load this into our wall sconce that I have already saved. I'd recommend you do that. And it doesn't matter where I place this because I will ultimately align this in just a second. So align this here to that. I will lock that. And then we can come to our west side view. And, you know, looking at the profile here, we kind of want the bottom to more or less match the bottom. So that's fine. So maybe a good thing to do here, and this is probably what I would recommend that you do, is let's draw a plane and just determine what this dimension is. We can do that by measuring about an inch, like just over an inch. So really, if I wanted to get precise, I probably should have made this reference plane before I drew this revolve just to know kind of what it was and to be able to determine what it is. But I can go ahead and put that there and I'll add a dimension and just lock it. So it just happens to be 1 1/8 inch, 1/8 inch. All right, bring this down. So then what I can do is take that and align there at the bottom. So that looks really good. You know, obviously we need to bring the shade in because that's really all that's left. And so determining what this dimension is, if you remember, we did determine that this is our 4.9 inches right there. So what I can do is I need another reference plane, so I'll get rid of that. But let's go ahead and draw a plane here just in space and then give me a dimension here. And now I'll set this to 4.9 inches, and I actually want to lock this in, and now I have the extents there. I can simply align right there, and would you look at that? Okay, so this looks very nice, and one limitation to these images is how the shade is mounted or whatever. Again, I'm not going to worry about this because if you can tell me how it's supposed to work out, even looking at the website, this doesn't tell you. So it's essentially floating, and honestly, for the sake of what we're trying to create and the fact that it's realistic, I'm really happy with this and it looks good. So finally is the fun and easy part, which is applying materials. So if I had to guess, I'm going to have 2 different materials here. Well, technically 3. We've got the light source, we've got everything below the light, and then kind of everything with the fixture attaching to the wall. We can just pick all of these models, and at this point it basically just serves as a regular family that we're used to working with. So once I choose these elements that we want, they're faces, of course, I can tab and select everything, even with the back, because that seems to make the most sense. I can then set a material parameter over here. So there's my material, and I can set a parameter, and now I don't have a parameter. So let's just call this fixture mounting, anything, it doesn't matter. I'll have this be by type, and this will be the same no matter what. Choose that, and we're done. Okay, and then now I do want the exact same thing for this as well as everything right there. And looks like I have an extra model here, which just simply needs to go away because, it's that top. So I can get rid of this profile right there, and that's correct. There, that's closed up. All right, so now I can tab all of this, and so I want this also to be everything, and even this one right here. I want all of this to actually be our fixture mount. That's great. And then finally, what you want to call these. This is definitely light source related. It's not the actual light source. Just keep that in mind. So all of this is going to be its own. Let's call this light source mount. If we can spell, that would help. Light source mount. Okay. So that's all the material. And then finally, the easiest of all is simply choosing our light source. And so there we go. Finally, we're going to make this our light source. And so the nice thing about a light source and having a bulb here is that we can truly add, obviously, a parameter for this, but when I add a material in Revit, more specifically Twinmotion or some other program, I can have this be an emissive material, so it looks like the light bulb's lit up. So beautiful stuff. So that is done. I'm going to save this, and we should be ready to load it in, because what I'm looking at now is the fact that we have our massing. And again, I'm not going to worry about these materials. So I could make this a material just like anything else that we did, but I don't need to, because I'm going to add, again, what we did earlier, add those wall faces. And there I can add the material that I need to those to determine what the shade looks like and everything like that. Okay, so I will then save this, and we will load this into our project because we are ready to take a look at it and put on the finishing touches. I don't need to save this project, but I do need to load this model in. So here it is. I'm just going to drag this in, and we can see, yeah, that looks pretty good. There are clearly some times where you get to this point and realize, oh no, I missed a step, because let's look at this. If I go up to massing inside and I decide to hide my massing, well, everything goes away. We want the shade to go away because that'll be the only massing, and we'll have added walls, but I don't want this actual fixture to go away. So what am I supposed to do? Well, technically I missed a step, but I didn't really miss it because it's something that we can do. But just in this family, there will be an extra nested family, which is not a huge deal, because in the end, it will all work the same. So I'm going to go in here and edit my family once again. Here we are. We just built this. This is fine. Everything that we did here is fine. I just should have loaded this into, instead of a conceptual mass, I should have had this actually as an adaptive family, a generic adaptive. So there it is, generic model adaptive. So I'll go ahead and open this. And again, not a huge deal because it's all here. Now that I'm inside my new adaptive component generic model, I can go and basically take this version of the fixture, and I don't need the massing because we'll load that in there separately, but I can just copy this in. Copying this here and then pasting this. We can obviously locate this wherever we want it, and that looks good. Again, I'll go to my top view, and we can make sure this is in the right place. Selecting all of this and just moving this to the origin should suffice. So let's just check in 3D to make sure. This is great. This is what I expected. And again, now what I will need to do is come back into my shade here, which is great, and then go ahead and load this into my new family that I just made, the adaptive component family. I would like a parameter that is something basically like how far off the ground. It's a wall, so it's not going to be on the ground by default. So as much as I would love this to go into some sort of wall-based family or anything like that, it's just not going to happen. And that's perfectly fine. It's just kind of the way it is. We're working with masses, so in this case, it has to be within an adaptive component family, and because we have everything set up in this way, it's all totally fine. So we can address this by going to our family here, and I don't need this shade necessarily, but I want to take this model, just this one, this in to an adaptive component family, and then load that into another one, and you'll see why here. So I'm going to copy this one. Again, here's a way we can work around it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm in just a basic adaptive component generic model. And so what pasting this in is going to do is allow me to have this, because this is in a generic model family, it's going to not be a mass. And that's kind of what I want, because it was made, quote, made in this family, which is an adaptive component. I now don't have to worry about this not showing up as a mass, okay? So let's go ahead and just locate this correctly. So I have all this here, and if I locate this right there, that looks good. Make sure I'll go to my side view just to see that it looks good, and yeah, it looks good. I do like that. That's correct. That origin point is right there. So with this, what I've done essentially is I've added this parameter in my fixture family. This is the adaptive component that just has this fixture. And what I've had to do is set this reference plane that I'm basically hosting this entire model to as the origin, essentially. So it defines the origin, it's a strong reference. So that allows me to put in this instance parameter height. If I select this and choose this, you can see it actually does move up and down. So this is done, and we're going to actually load this then into an adaptive component family that I'm going to load the shade into, and that'll allow us to have the shade as a mass and have the rest of the light fixture as an actual model component. Okay, so let me save this, and I will then open a family that I can load this into. With that saved, I'll then again go to File, New Family in this case, and do a generic adaptive right there. Okay, and so the reason why I do want to load this in is because I want to set a height to this. I want to have some more control. So let's go ahead and load this in. We'll load this into our new family there. That's great. I will save it and it will be closed. Wonderful. Cool. So there it is. And now I'll go to my reference level here and I want to align this, of course, so that it shows up where I want it to. And we have these wonderful alignments there. That's perfect. Okay, so this is good. Now that I have more control, I come into my side view and I want to set some sort of a dimension that is default to be off the ground. This is a wall sconce and I don't want this necessarily to be on the ground. Maybe this is 4 feet by default. And so what I want to do is actually go ahead and make this a parameter. And so let's call this height, I guess that's what will work. And I want this to be an instance parameter because you might have one sconce next to another that are different heights, just for what it is. And you have more flexibility this way. So let's go ahead and change that. And I want to make sure that my mounting height there, 4 feet, is aligned to that point and lock it. So, okay, wonderful. So now as I change this in the project, this will move up and down. Wonderful stuff. So then I can come all the way back to just my basic shade, and it's a mass, and I can load this into my new family there. So let's go ahead and load this in. And again, it doesn't matter where I place. I can align this using the wonderful reference planes that are basically shipped with this guy. So load this in, that's great. And then now I need to go to my other perspective or other elevation here, set my dimension. And so I probably do have a reference plane here, which is just by default going to be whatever this dimension is. And that's right there. And I'm going to go ahead and just lock this there because I want that to stay. And so now this reference line will move up and down according to this instance parameter. And I want to make sure that the bottom of that is aligned to the bottom of that. And lock that. So then finally, I've got one more that I want to add here, which will then be our 4.9 inches. And that's going to be static and locked in as well. So let's set this to 4.9 inches. This doesn't need to be a parameter or anything like that, but I do want to lock this in. And then finally, just aligning this to that. Wow. Okay, so this looks really good. And we have lots of flexibility. Again, if I go to 3D view here, wonderful. This looks good. I'm happy with this, and I'll start to add everything in the project. So I can load this into the project, and we'll have this light fixture that is an actual model, a generic model, and we'll have this that we can add our walls and apply our shade material to. I like this, and now I have my height components. This is basically a wall light fixture, which is wonderful. Let's go ahead and load this in. Now, with the caveat, obviously, that this is not a light fixture. The adaptive component family will not allow for light fixtures, so that's the only thing. It's still going to be a generic model. I wish this were not the case, but it just is. We can deal with all of that later. So let's go ahead and load this in. Great, and with this loaded in, we can then go back to our wall and make sure we have our 1/8 inch wall set, and then we can simply place our walls back onto this, which is great. So we go to wall, and no matter what thickness you're using, that will work. Place this, and there we go. We want to make sure we're on the back, so then you just switch that one, not a huge deal. I have that location line to the finished interior. Cool. Looks like I need to do the same thing. Flip that one more time for that one. Great. Now look at that. Okay. So that's awesome. Looking good. Now I can simply hide my mass. And then there we go. I have the full light fixture. It is good to go. The last thing I want to test is just the nature of it being parametric and being able to move that up and down. So let's see what happens when I select this element and change this height from 4 feet to, let's say, 2 feet. Okay, so the model itself goes down, which I expected, the mass, and that's right. This is typically how I would expect it to work. So if I select all these faces here, which is just the walls, I should be able to update the face, and these will jump there. And that's great. Look at that. So, okay, so that's a simple workflow. Once you've loaded this into your project, you have the option here coming in. So with that, and the fact that we can successfully move this up and down as an instance parameter, update these faces, and then finally we can come in here to edit type. All right, and with this finally here, we know that we can select this model and move this down to 2 feet. To move it down to any different elevation, we can update these faces, not a problem, and we can always go in here to the type, edit the type, and then apply our materials. That's great. And of course the materials to this essentially wall itself. It is the shade, of course, but yeah, that will do it. It was quite an exhausting video. And if you want to skip to this point in this video where you just download the model, then you're more than welcome to do that. I will have that for you for free in my school community. The link to join is the first link in the description below. I really hope you learned something. If you did, please demolish that like button. It really helps me out a lot. Also tells me that you might have liked the video too. So also do consider subscribing and again, joining that school community. I hope this was a good rundown of an advanced massing family that integrates light fixture. One of the limitations being that it's going to end up as a generic model. That's just kind of the way it is. Other than that, you basically have everything that you would have with a light fixture other than knowing it's a generic model. And we got the double curve, we got everything down. I will leave the other type that's angled and slightly different in dimension when it comes to the shade also in the school community. That will be all a part of one link. It'll be one family, so everything will look cleaned up there. So definitely go check that out. I will see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day, and thank you very much for watching.